Hello, and welcome back to the Just Follow Joy podcast. My name's Ariana Joy. I'm your host, and I'm a human design reader and teacher. And this week, we are zoning in on a very specific part of the human design system, which is something called the 5-line. And if you don't know what that is, the 5-line, also known as the 5th line, is one of the 6 lines that make up something called the hexagram, which comes from the I Ching and is one of the systems that make human design body graph. So basically the hexagram, when you're looking at it, visually, it is this stack of 6 horizontal lines, but it represents much more than that. It's actually a classification of 6 different archetypes. So each of those lines is going to represent a different archetype and have a number associated with it. And if you have that whatever line it is as one of the 2 numbers in your profile, then it's going to be an archetype that you're here to fulfill in order to play out your purpose on Earth. So for example, if you have the 6 line and the 2 line together and you have a 6-2 profile, you have the energy or the energetic archetype of the role model and then the energetic archetype of the hermit. And understanding both of those and how they work together is going to be important for how you play out your purpose. So if you have a 2-5, 3-5, 5-1, or 5-2 profile, that means that the 5-line is going to be very prominent in your human design, and learning how to leverage this energy is something that's going to be very, very helpful for you. And actually, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're a 5-line profile, let me know in the comments. Tell me what your profile is, as well as your energy type and authority, because I love to hear. I'm a 5-1, so I'm very interactive. I love this kind of stuff. But anyway, like I said, each line represents an archetype, and the archetype of the 5-line is called the heretic. And that basically means that what you're here to do is universalize something. So spread something around on a grand scale, whether that's a message, information, solutions, your gifts and talents, etc. And often the way that 5 lines are meant to do that is by offering something really out of the box, something innovative, something different, something that goes against the grain. And as a result, might even be a little bit controversial, sometimes very controversial, even if we don't mean for it to be. So 5 lines can naturally be a little bit polarizing, and that's just kind of our game. That's our gig. That's what we're here to do. And it also does mean that you have this gift of being a problem solver. So someone who swoops in and saves the day with their unique out of the box viewpoint, perspective, or ability to fix things, which is really, really cool. But something that's also important to know is that as a 5-line, you have an aura that is going to be a little more misty and a little less clear to other people, which means that it makes it really, really easy for them to project their assumptions or expectations of who you are and what you can do for them. It's kind of like they can't really see, it's actually exactly like this. They can't really see what's going on in your aura and your energy. So they unconsciously make assumptions and create an image for you based on that. And that means that this could be completely unfounded in who you actually are. And we're going to talk in this episode about some examples of that. But the thing is that this can also be very, very helpful because it actually makes it easier for us to do our job of universalizing. So it makes it easier for us to appeal to lots of different kinds of people, to lots of different kinds of groups, have them trust us or assume competency in us. And then we can go in and do our job of fixing something or offering a solution or sharing information. So like teaching people. However, we don't control what other people project onto us. No one does. So as 5 lines, we really need to learn how to navigate this big wild world of projections, also known as the projection field, or else we will get quote unquote burnt at the stake. So we'll get blamed for disappointing people when we don't live up to the expectations or responsibilities that they have put on us, whether that was something that was right for us or not. So we really need to learn how to work with that, and also some of the inherent heartbreak that can come with that too. And there is no one who I can think who's better to talk with this stuff about than Allyson Forseth and Kelsey Tortorice. They are the founders of Heretic Haven, and I am so stoked to share them with you. Her work centers nuance and emotional safety, grounded in constant reverence for the cyclical nature of healing, humanity, and growth. Kelsey Tortorice is a 5-2 emotional manifestor, as well as a post-capitalist astrologer, teacher, human design experimenter, and community initiator. They are a student and teacher of the Maya always seeking to understand and universalize the mechanics of reality with the context of individuality, the cosmos, and consciousness as a whole. They're two total badasses. I really love learning from them, just awesome people and great people to learn about the five line from, because they know this so in depth. They are very well versed, both in source material and also in their own well-observed experiences as five lines. And together they run something called Heretic Haven, which I mentioned before, which is a careful and immersive exploration of the five line experience, from projection, villainization, and victimization to acceptance, responsibility, and empowerment. So we had a really great conversation in this episode. And I think that honestly, anyone with a five line profile will get a lot out of it. And even if you don't have a five line in your profile, but you know somebody who does, and they are really important to you and you love them, this is a great way to get a little bit more insight into how they're here to live their lives and work with them and have appreciation for them. So, especially if you are trying to figure out how to not even just thrive, but function with an aura like ours, again, because I'm a five line profile as well, this episode is definitely for you. And I can't wait for you to check it out. Before you do, though, I just want to say that if you like the Just Follow Joy podcast, if you love the Just Follow Joy podcast, it would mean so much if you could like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on another podcast platform, if you could subscribe and leave some kind of positive feedback there. That is super helpful and always helps me get this out in front of other people who will like and love it too. But with all that said, let's dive in and hear from Allyson and Kelsey. All right, Kelsey and Allyson, I'm so excited to have you guys here. Thanks for joining me today.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Hi, so excited.
And if you guys are not watching this, the first person who talked was Allyson. The second person who talked was Kelsey. And then me, you should be able to tell because I host this podcast and also I sound like I have 7 frogs in my throat. So that should be a pretty good indicator of who's talking right now. But so today we're talking all about the five line and our experiences as five lines. And I've had an episode on this before, but what's especially interesting about this one to me is that both Allyson and Kelsey, first off, they focus on working with five lines. They have a program called Heretic Haven, which I absolutely love the idea of. It's so funny, Allyson, like I had no clue that you were involved in that until I started seeing Heretic Haven like posts showing up on my like Discover. And then my friend Caitlin Gehring, who's a 3-5, she was liking a bunch of them. And then I saw that you were liking a bunch of them too, and that you followed them. And then I saw that you were involved in it. I was like, oh, hell yeah, then I'm super interested in that. And then I found Kelsey through that. But secondly, the reason why I think this is so cool is because we're all also transpersonal profiles, meaning that our five line in our profile is first. So this is conscious for us. We're quite aware of our five line experiences, and not to say somebody who had it as their second line or second number wouldn't be as aware, but they wouldn't be as aware for the most part. It's a little bit more obvious to us. So with that being said, when the two of you learned that you were five lines, like what part of that really did you identify most with? And like, did you identify with it right off the bat? Or did it take a little contemplation to realize like, this explains a lot about how I interact with people or how people see me? Because at first I was like, no, I don't see that. But then when I really took a second to think about it, it was like, oh, no, I definitely identify with the 5-1 profile and what they talk about with this.
Yeah, I would say it definitely took a while for me. I read things at first about the 5-1 being a teacher, and I was a teacher, am a teacher. So that always resonated. But I think for me, I resonated a lot more with the first line insecurity. And I maybe didn't see where that was showing up more as fifth line paranoia than really true insecurity. But yeah, I mean, I read about the projection field and I kind of thought like, does anyone really see anyone? And I didn't really like fully resonate with the experiences that I had had that were impacted by the projection field. And it's been this very like spiraling process of coming back to it over and over and over again. And each time I spiral back to it, there's something older and deeper and perhaps even more painful than I was ready to witness early on in my experiment. So yeah, it's definitely been a process. It's like I didn't really grasp the depth of it right away. something I've talked about before is like it's almost like the fifth line concept itself is like in a projection field. It's a little hazy, it's a little mysterious too. So I didn't really get it right away, in the way that I do now.
I feel pretty much the exact same way. You know, for a long time too, I was like, I feel like I'm never really going to understand myself because of this. And as a five line, and Kelsey, I mean, we'll hear what you think about this. But for me, one of the biggest things has been like, when can I really trust what, like, even source material, but especially just other people in general, like, say about who I am and what I'm doing, especially with an undefined identity center, meaning that it's like so fluid for me. So I think that's part of why when I was reading about the 5-1, which is the same profile as Allyson, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I really identify with that, right? And it did take more contemplation for me too. But yeah, Kelsey, I'd love to hear what your experience with this was because you have a harmonic profile too. Like you have double
Mm-hmm.
projection on you as a 5 too,
Mm-hmm.
and also you're such a rare profile type. So did that affect you like really getting material on this?
No, because I self-studied astrology for a long time before I did any formal training, to the point that when I started doing formal training, I was annoyed because I already knew too much to do that formal training. So with human design, like as soon as I caught the bug, pretty quickly I like signed up for courses. So it was not challenging for me to find like quality information about my profile. I do think though that there might have been an obstacle around like what's the 5 and what's the 2, because there is such a harmonic between them. I talk about a lot when I talk about my first entry into fifth line awareness, that there were pieces of it that felt so resonant and so validating, and then pieces of it that have just been like this, like Allyson said, this like spiraling back and finding these depths that have actually been a really like griefful process, like looking back and actually seeing the mechanics of the projection throughout my life in ways that I was not aware of. I always picture the fifth line as like a disco ball. Because yes, we're a mirror, but like we're all these different mirrors based on who's looking, you know? And so kind of like Allyson was talking about the projection, like anything having to do with the 5 is kind of mystical and mysterious. I think there were like pieces of that disco ball that I saw right away. Also, like Allyson, used to be a high school teacher, incorporate mostly teaching in my work in the healing arts now. Um, so really resonated a lot with the like universalizer, you know, being able to explain things in a way that could reach people. That was like, oh yes, that's me. I'm a teacher, I'm a messenger. Didn't understand projection. Like I did, because I think about projection a lot, but not in any way where I was like, I received this more. I had no connection to that piece of it. And as I was listening to you both talk, I was thinking about my defined ego and defined G, and how like projection was probably happening, but I was like, I know who I am, you know. I
I
know
would
my worth.
love that.
I know what I can do and can't do, you know, define
Yeah.
ego, define G. And then also the 2, right? Like we're a bit aloof, like we're not paying as much attention because we're not striving like you are as 5-1s to get that security. I'm mostly just like, leave me alone. Like, who are you? Get away. Also closed manifestor aura. So I think Allyson and I have talked about this a lot, like specifically the difference between 5-1 projector and 5-2 manifestor. So I think my first realization was like a lot of empowerment. And I'm also finding out I'm a manifestor, right? So I'm like, oh my God, I can make things happen. Like, and I can spread you know, I'm like focused on impact and influence and like feeling very validated in that part of my essence. And then over time, I had some experiences like in real time with the awareness and projection that were just really eye-opening, and then really started to clarify the many ways and many different depths to which I'd been experiencing projection my whole life. So it was kind of like a year or so of like just feeling really empowered by it, and then followed by 2 or 3 years of like a reckoning and feeling very heartbroken and sad about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, and I'm sure we'll dive a little bit more into this too, like I have really had to, okay, one of my things in life, regardless of being a five line, that I've really had to work on is seeing myself as such a victim to the things that have happened to me and the people who have been mean to me and didn't understand me and yada, yada, yada. And so when I learned I was a fifth line, like first off, the thing I really really resonated with being a teacher as well. Like I love that so much more than like being a coach or something like that. Like I love disseminating information. It's always been the biggest thing for me. But when I was like starting to really integrate this five line projection idea, I started remembering, and it sounds like this is what happened with you guys too, with the spiral, right? Going down into the deeper and older experiences. I started remembering all these times and being like, is that what happened? Was there like an expectation on me that I totally just breezed past? Because now it's incredibly obvious to me that that is probably what happened and really opens my eyes up to this in the meantime. And I mean, so I went through a few years and I feel like I'm now just learning to come out of it where maybe not so heartbroken, but like angry and feeling like full of blame towards other people. Really, work from people like you guys and work from people like the other two five lines that I've had on my podcast talking about this has really shown me where like we can take so much more agency around that. But that has been really empowering for me. So like I had a moment where I was like, wait a second, that's what fucking happened. Then like sadness, now empowerment. So if you guys wouldn't mind sharing, I mean, what are some of your more memorable experiences of people obviously projecting onto you as a fifth line? We've talked about looking back and kind of noticing that or being more aware of it, but are there any that really come to mind for you? Like, especially one that was like so silly or so untrue that it was very clear that that's what was going on for you. And this can be, a lot of people who listen to my podcast are business owners or aspiring business owners. So this could be in business, right? And what's so funny is that even though people know that there are five lines in human design, this can happen all the time in the human design community when sharing information or how you see things. But also, I mean, if you have any just from your personal life too, I think that can be wildly helpful for people.
It's wild to me, just a note on your aside there, how many people claim to have this awareness and know the system and then cannot see the bag over their head or the mirror over their head when they're just like absurdly projecting onto a fifth line.
It's wild to
And
me.
it's wild. It's like, what? You study the system? Okay. Um, but yes, I'll just try to rattle off a few like, and I think to emphasize the like value of this particular question, I'll say that the most absurd ones have been the best teaching experiences for me because they're the hardest ones for my not self to grab and attach to. Let me clarify that. When people are projecting absurd things onto me that I can tell are so far from the truth of the situation, or the truth of what I said, or the truth of what I feel, or the truth of what my message was, or whatever, it makes it really difficult for my not self mind, in particular my undefined ajna, to be like, I believe your opinion about me, so I'm actually really grateful for these most absurd ones, because the subtle ones that feel kind of somewhat rooted in truth, those ones can get so deeply planted within and completely reshape your sense of self, even as someone with a defined ego and G, they really get to me, for me, on an ajna level. But yeah, I had two business ones that have happened in the last few years, with like people who I either didn't really know at all or kind of knew at an arm's length, from one the astrology space online and one the human design space online. One of them was like, I don't even remember what it was she was projecting, but it ended up being this whole weird like attempt at a cancellation campaign where I had been co-running this astrology project that I initiated called Ascendant Assemblies, where it required like a lot of people to be a part of it, because we would do meetings for every single ascendant sign every other month, just to chat about like the transits and how things are hitting your chart, based on your ascendant, which I won't explain that because it's astrology, not human design. But someone was like mad at me about some Twitter interaction. And I think the issue was that they were trying to demand that I defend human design because they thought it was problematic. And I was like, kind of like really for the first time holding my own in this manifestorness where I was like, nobody demands anything of me. You know, if I don't want to talk about this with you, I'm not going to. And I just kind of stopped responding on Twitter, and me not responding like sent them, because they had this sense that they were entitled to my like free education because they were trying to call out what was wrong about human design, and I wasn't willing to like play the role of defending human design. And so it went from this like unrelated Twitter thing to then they tried to get people to boycott this like not even for profit community effort that I and like 12 other people were making happen. And yeah, it was just kind of wild to see like the lengths that people will go to when they're so hooked into their story, their narrative about a thing. And I think looking back on that one, it's been validating to see how I actually can't, it's hard for me to even remember what really happened because it was just so absurd. It was so like nothing made sense. These leaps this person was making didn't make sense. They were just so activated. So that was one. And then I had one in the human design space where it was like a very quintessential fifth line experience. I universalized something in an Instagram post that I had been watching for like 2 years. And I had kind of a handful of people in mind. I was kind of like challenging a behavior that I saw in certain human design spaces around like making oneself seem superior or more relevant by putting down the way other practitioners talk about human design.
I've never seen that happen before. That's so weird.
Right.
I think you should have gotten called out for that.
Yeah. And so I like universalized. And it's like funny because I say this stuff all the time, but there must have been something that made one particular person aware in this instance that they were one of the people I was kind of watching. And they decided that this post was specifically about them, and they decided that it was racist, and they started like doing hour-long IG lives for a few days in a row about me, and they don't know anything about me. And the piece that really got me was like that got me to just be done with it, you know, and be like, okay, completely detached from reality, was they were referring to me as like, quote, not even a real human design professional, which is like, you don't know anything about my work or my credentials. And in fact, at least at the time, I don't really know what this person's up to now, but at the time I was a certified I am a certified human design guide through IHDS, and this person was not. So it was just, you know, like, who are you even talking about? You're talking about some made up person that you have decided that you hate, you know? And so it made it actually much easier for me to just kind of put down any care or like feel comfortable not feeling a need to defend myself, because it's like, you're literally not talking about me. You're literally talking about like a caricature. And then on a different note, I had a family member who I had a falling out with about 3 years ago. And it was a really difficult, like it all happened through this difficult conversation where she was just kind of airing her grievances over a 10-year period with me, which was like, kind of feels like getting the ground pulled out from under you, you know? And I've like analyzed this and looked at this and learned a lot from it over the last few years. But the moment in that conversation with her that I saw clearly this was a very intense projection was at the end, when she saw that I wasn't going to completely fold and be like, you're right, I'm a terrible person. And she kind of lost it, kind of similar to the Twitter example I said. You know, I don't know how much of this is a fifth line thing versus a manifestor thing, because people will like really go to many lengths to try to control a manifestor. And when they can't, they like get really worked up. So I think that was part of it too. But at the end of the conversation, when I had stayed very regulated and kind and like tried to listen, but also wasn't willing to just be like, you're right, I'm a terrible person. Then these things started coming out from her. She got more irate, and these things started coming out that were like, made it really clear that she was jealous, but also that she didn't know anything about the nuance of my experience. She only could see things through the lens of her own like insecurity and jealousy. So she was saying things like, I feel like I can't sing because you sing. I feel like I can't do astrology because you do astrology. I'm having so much trouble with like career and stuff. And here you are, like your business is just so simple and easy. And it was like that line in particular that I was like, I've been actually really struggling in this like community business that I had created. And she had this perception that it was just the easiest, most successful thing in the world. And I was like at my wit's end with it and going through so much grief and starting to pull away from it. And it was like the biggest thing happening in my life at that moment was that it wasn't working out. And I was having to kind of resign from something that I had co-founded with people and spent 4 years invested in. And she didn't even know that. She just had this idea that like everything's so easy for you, right? And this is also successful. And so that piece was like really clarifying for me because it really showed me like, you only have the capacity in this moment and maybe ever, I don't know, but at least in this moment to see me as the character that you need to see to play out your own insecurities on. And it's so detached from the truth of my human experience. This is someone that I thought was like one of my best friends. And I'm finding out that you can't even see like behind this wall. Like you don't know these very obvious things about my life right now. You're not even able to register them.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot relate to like losing someone that close to me, especially a family member. On a lighter level, I can definitely, and Allyson, I'm sure you can too, but relate to this like, oh, you don't really see me, right? Like I feel like I've kind of been making this obvious, or I feel like I've, been expressing this. And maybe this could partly be, that closed aura with the manifestor where it's like, how is this not more obvious to you? Because like this is my experience, which I can't speak to because I'm not a manifestor. But yeah, I've definitely felt that like, oh, that kind of puncture to the heart of like, I'm not really seen by you, am I? A place I've had like a couple of friends who I've had that experience with where it's like become very clear to me like you do not see me at all. Like and I feel like I'm showing up as who I am. The biggest place for me has been like dating. But that's a whole other story. But Allyson, what about you? Like what are some of the most obvious ones to you that you've been through?
Yeah, I can speak to some of the same Instagram human design community in heavy air quotes things that have happened too. And honestly, with some of the same people that Kelsey mentioned without naming, where so I was running a course called Human Design in Color, which was focused on variable, and it had gone through 3 or 4 rounds at this point. And this pretty popular human design influencer was talking about me without naming me and saying that, so like I'm a first line and I really enjoy learning from source material. And I acknowledge that it's not accessible to everyone. And so when I teach, I make an effort to provide source material to people and also give them the tools to better access it or understand it if they want to.
And you do a great job of it too. You guys, if you want to learn color and tone, Allison's a great person to learn that from. Go look at her old posts.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, so like, I don't know, it made sense to me to incorporate those materials in the program and like offer them to people as an additional like bonus material. Now that you have a bit of a foundation, maybe try accessing the original source and see if it resonates better. And this person was going on and on about how someone out there in the human design space that this person didn't want to name, who was me, was teaching on color and didn't understand it well enough. So then I also had to give them the lectures. Like I didn't understand it well enough. So I was like insecure and had to give them additional materials, which was not at all what was happening. So it's like stuff like that. And the hypocrisy that is revealed by this particular dynamic is so hilarious because this person has created their entire platform on source material is best. And this person says, I only exclusively study source material, so you should learn from me. very interesting that they don't want people to actually access source material because they want to be the sole provider of their own digested and regurgitated version of source material. So stuff like that honestly, you can tell now there's like some bitterness and anger coming up when I talk about it because I'm like, what the fuck? But at the time, this is someone that I had looked up to for so long as like the leader of the human design space. And I was so hurt by the fact that they would believe this about me, even though I didn't think it was true. A similar thing happened with this program. It's like fifth line projector has some version of success, and the other projectors in this space have to like tear it down in some way and compare themselves to it to say, I'm better because, which is the pattern that Kelsey was speaking to in that post that triggered these people, was this person saying that as a projector, I'm not capable of teaching to groups of people. And human design and color had like 12, 14, 16 people in it per round. And they were like, so if you're with a projector who's leading a group, you're not getting a good experience because projectors can't actually do that. But I can because I have this specific gate in my chart. And so I can teach groups, but no other projectors can. And I'm like, I am a licensed teacher who used to teach in Spanish to groups of 30 plus high schoolers. Like I know how to teach to a group. So it's just stuff like that. That's like, you really, the like feeling threatened and feeling the need to like poke holes in someone else's, what someone else is doing just to like make themselves seem better.
Can I just interject that this isn't what Allison's describing here? Projectors can't lead groups is what Allyson and I like to call bad heresy or bad universalizations, like false universalizations, non-fifth lines trying to speak in some kind of like big universalized way, and they just like can't see beyond their own ass, and it's like a terrible attempt at universalization. That's something we've been watching a lot lately and intend to drop some heresy on at some point.
I would love that. I've never really thought of it that way, but I think that's absolutely fascinating and something I do see. There is, okay, I'm also not going to drop a name here, but there is a person on active on social media. As I was talking to my mom about this person the other day, and I was like, they just, like they're part of the reason I can't go on social media. Like they rev my engine so much. This person's not a 5-line and makes some very universalizing claims about like what you can and cannot do depending on how long you've been in your experiment, what is really true and truly human design. Totally tore down one of my favorite teachers. And I was like, my pal, my person, my social media dude. You know, it's so funny because especially with their profile, like they are entirely the opposite of universalizing. And so I totally identify with all of that. And I think what's so funny too is, I mean, for me, and I don't know if y'all really dealt with this, but something that we talked about in the past with 5-line is that like reputation and upholding this story to make sure that like people don't attack us. So like image management. And I, for so long, felt like that was my job. And I'm really now just getting to the point where I'm like, what if I didn't do that? And I was actually just reading about the 5-line again today. And it was like, you're going to fall from grace. The question is, what are you willing to fall from grace for? And I was like, that's really well put. And knowing that, I'm like, I have to just deal with the fact that sometimes people are going to put these obscene stories on me and there's not a whole lot I can do about it because that's how they want to see me. Like listening to you guys talk about this stuff, like I can think of a lot of things where people have put like motives on me that they expect that I'm doing something from, where I'm like, that's so wildly opposite of what I'm doing. And also the opposite of what I told you I'm doing this for, you know? So I can completely identify with that. And for me, I'm really learning. And I think this honestly happens to come from gate 18 for me, which is defined in my chart, that like fear of authority, that like, if I do something wrong, like the group or the man is going to come and like kill me or knock me down. And I'm not going to get another chance or get access to resources because of it or something. But you know, I think you guys are right too, with like seeing the very obscene versions of this is you're like, if that can happen, then anything in between can happen. And I just have to kind of know that the way I'm designed is a really big part of that. And you know what comes to mind is that post, I don't know which one of you guys made it on Instagram about Lady Gaga responding to Anderson Cooper when he was like, so, I mean, what about that rumor that you have a male appendage? And she was like, what if I did? Would that be so bad? Honestly, like, would that be a crime? And I was like, I have never felt so empowered listening to that.
Yeah, we should all aspire to be, may we all aspire to be
Like Lady
completely
Gaga.
unfazed like that.
True. Yeah,
Yeah,
whether you're a 5 line or not, may we all aspire to have that Aries energy.
Mhm.
Oh my God.
That was one of Allison's many genius meme reel ideas. That
Oh,
one
that's
in
so funny.
particular.
I totally would have thought that was Kelsey. I would not have thought that was you, Allison, but I love that. Oh my God.
I used to be obsessed with Lady Gaga. I actually got a tattoo when I was 18 because Lady Gaga has the same tattoo. The peace sign on the wrist.
Wait, you're an Aries sun, right? That 42 is an Aries gate? Yeah.
We
Okay.
both are.
No wonder.
Aries. Yeah.
Both
Yeah.
Aries, Sun, and Venus, right? Both
Yep.
of us. Mhm.
Oh, wow. You love hard. Love with passion.
Yeah, and I love when the Aries, because Allison's a Cancer rising and I'm a Sag rising, so very different kind of like film over our Ariesness. But I love when Allison's Aries comes out like it did when you were talking about your projection experiences and you allowed that bitterness and angerness to breathe a little bit.
I
Bitterness and
love
anger.
that. The Cancer rising makes so much sense. I like feel that like more nurturing, like moon-like energy from you. So that makes a lot of sense. I'm a Capricorn rising, if anyone couldn't guess by my bony structure. In fact,
Oh,
I
that's
feel like
so
it's pretty
fun.
obvious.
Ariana, our charts are like opposite because we have opposite suns and opposite rising signs. So that's so fun.
Oh,
That is
you're a
so
Libra.
cool. I am. That's right.
Yeah,
The cap
hard-
speaks pretty loud.
It's hard to imagine being a Libra in a 5th line. That sounds like a particular pain.
I feel like I came down here with a specific mission, which was like, learn, just stop caring so much, please. So we've talked about these experiences, but overall, have you seen that there's a pattern that people seem to kind of like project onto you? And honestly, from your stories, I've kind of already seen a particular pattern. I'd love to see if what you feel on the inside matches up with that. But yeah, what do you feel people have kind of put on you the most? Like, what have you seen as a repeating pattern with these projections?
You don't want to go first. You muted yourself. When I first saw that question this morning, I'm like very interested in seeing the pattern you see, Ariana, because my first instinct was like, there's not much of a pattern because people project their own shit. So back to the disco ball, right? I'm not just a mirror. I'm like 100 mirrors, depending on who's looking. So that's kind of if I'm seeking a concise universal answer, at least today, no. That being said, you know, we all have a distinct frequency, right? Like our aura type and our definition, our gates, our channels, our centers, our lines, our colors, our tones, like that's the starting point of our frequency for people to catch, be impacted by, be influenced by, and project onto. So I'm sure there's something, you know, and when I think about when I try to see those patterns, I think for me it's a lot like I get like a projection of confidence a lot, which that's not completely false, right? Like people feel my defined ego, they amplify that. And they feel this like sense of self-worth that they then sometimes, depending on the state of wounding in their own ego, really want to fight. But I think like with the 5-2, the double projection, I think people do this to second lines a lot because the natural projection onto the second line is like, ooh, look how good they are at the thing they do. Look how easy it is for them. Look how natural this is for them.
That's the pattern I was seeing for you, by the way. Yeah. It's everything's so easy for you.
And like, it's not completely untrue because I am a second line. So the things I do confidently and well, they do come naturally to me. But that doesn't mean that they don't also come with a lot of like, maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Adjacent challenges. Like, yes, learning about human design and astrology, teaching about human design and astrology, back of my hand. Like, it's almost when I sometimes say when I found these systems, it was almost just like clarifying stuff I already knew, like remembering the language of astrology and human design. So they do come very naturally to me, but like having a closed aura, having this double projection field, having a defined ego, like it being on the cross of a people, it brings things up in people that create a lot of ostracization. Is that how you say that word?
Ostracism? I don't know. Yeah.
That make people want to ostracize me, and villainize me. And so, Allyson and I use the word dehumanization a lot when we talk about projection onto the fifth line, and how that's a thing that happens not only when you're villainizing a fifth line and knocking them off a pedestal, but also when you're pedestalizing them and you have these like ridiculous expectations of us. And so, yeah, I think like dehumanization is the pattern that I see. Like people, they sense a confidence, they sense a naturalness, they sense maybe their inability to impact, influence, or control me with my closed aura. And so the stories that are created from that initial starting point of my actual essence become, they sometimes have a similar thread of like, she doesn't need support. Like everything is easy for her, it makes sense for me to dehumanize her because she's unhuman. She's she's able to whatever, like I can see kind of a similar feeling in the maybe foundational frequency of some of the stories and narratives, and they are based on my design, so I can kind of see it, but it doesn't make it any less dehumanizing because behind this closed aura, behind this double projection field is like still a person, still like a very human person with like depth and complexity and nuance that a lot of people miss when they are just really invested in the story that their own ego mind creates from interacting with a frequency like mine.
With 5 lines with our competence and thing, I've noticed a lot, and I see it a lot in 3/5s. And not, I mean, I don't meet a lot of 2/5s, but also in 2/5s, with this as their unconscious line, the drowning and other people being like, you're doing water aerobics. How cool, and like, you don't really like, you'll bounce back. So I can be mean to you, or I don't need to help you, or I can just like throw whatever at you, which is, I mean, a lot of celebrities are 3/5. So it's unsurprising. People are like, we can just sling whatever at them and they won't care. They're rich or they're good at their job, So it's funny that I see that. And then especially with the manifestor as well, it's like manifestors are so powerful. They'll be fine, right? They don't care. But I mean, as Kelsey, I'm sure you can attest to, manifestors are people with feelings.
Yeah.
So.
And like our power is so misconstrued, like everybody's not self wants to be a manifestor, right? Or at least that's a story that gets perpetuated a lot in human design. And so there's just another factor, I think, of like dehumanization because people, I think I think this is true for every type to an extent. So not to over generalize or over universalize, but like there's such misunderstanding about what life is like for manifestors. I think people project a sense of control onto us that we do not have any more control than any other type, right? Like we are waiting for urges. We are not creating those urges from mind. We're not directing our lives really any more than any other type. It just looks from the outside like we are. And I think the ego mind of other types often thinks that if it could just initiate, everything would be easier. So I think that's a part of it too. Like, yeah, there's a projection onto the manifestor type in general.
Yeah. Oh my God, we could have the best conversation about that. But Allyson, I would also love to hear if you have a pattern that comes up for you in particular.
Yeah, I think what's coming up for me right now is I'm going to frame it in relation to my sun gate, which is actually Ariana's earth gate. But the 42 is the gate of growth. And in the 5th line is called self-actualization. And I feel like maybe if I could find a pattern for some of the projections, it's around me growing and other people being triggered by that or being left behind by that. I shared recently inside of Heretic Haven something that happened when I was in high school, like a freshman in high school. And I was in a friend group and we were going to have a sleepover at this other girl's house. And I ran into another friend when we were walking around the neighborhood. And that friend was attending like a band practice for some guys in our grade. and she asked if I wanted to watch the band play. And I wanted to, like, projector, FOMO, like, I don't want to miss out on either social gathering. Like, they both sounded fun and cool. And I had been invited. And so I was excited about it. And I asked my friends that I was with if they would mind if I went to go watch this band play or practice or whatever. And they said, no, go ahead. We'll see you back at the house in a little while. And I went, had a good time, walked back to the house, and found all of my shit all over the yard in the rain. And my friends wouldn't let me in. And it's stuff like that that, like, I was like 14, 15 years old. I don't know what projection is. I didn't know that that was a projection experience. I thought I did something wrong and that I was being punished for it. And it was so hard for me to understand. Like, I asked if it was okay. They said it was. I believed them. But yeah, it's stuff like that. I had other friend experiences in high school where, like, certain friends of mine felt like they were getting left behind. And like the fifth line is so transpersonal, especially with a left angle cross. It's like, I'm here to meet strangers, like relationships last however long they last. But yeah, one of my friends, her mom at one point was like, don't worry about Allyson. She's a social climber. She's going to leave you behind anyway. As if I couldn't also be a loyal friend. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I think the other stories I shared seem related to that. And there was something with a former client of mine as well, where she once told me I was everything that's wrong with the human design community, which is like, could not be more blatantly depersonalized than just to be made the face of a whole thing. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that lands, but if I could see a pattern, it seems to be related to growth and people being triggered by or left behind by me growing.
Interesting. That's cool. I mean, I'm seeing now I'm totally projecting onto you on my own experience as a 5-1 has been, but because what I honestly would have expected a little bit was like maybe around what you know as a 5 line and like how deeply rooted you are in your foundation and through sharing that. But it seems like that is maybe a strong projection I'm taking from my own life onto you. Because one thing, I have another 5-1 friend, and I turned to her one day and I was like, have you ever noticed, or like, do you ever feel like people either think you're the smartest person in the world or the dumbest idiot they've ever met in their life? She's like, yes. And there's nothing in between. I was like, that's how I feel too. But, that's probably from my own one-line wounding of I don't know enough. I'm not secure enough. I'm paranoid about it because my pattern that has come up for me is like being very challenged in what I say and being told, you don't know enough to be saying that. Where did you get that information? Why are you saying that? I have a problem with that. And you're acting like you have more authority than you should. And that's like always, and there have been times when I remember one time, and I love my brother, he's not a bad person, but something I noticed a lot with him growing up was someone would say like, do you know about this? And I would say, I know about that. And he would go off flying off the handle and be like, oh, really, Ariana, you know all about that? Really? Tell me like the basics of, it's like kind of my brother, with his own things with intelligence. But that was something that was like really obvious to me growing up, was just like, don't talk about this unless you know absolutely everything about it. And then, so I can see how that I kind of like perpetuated that with my own beliefs about it. But that is a pattern that I've seen around like my intelligence and what I know and how deeply I've dove in with the one line. And so that is a pattern that I see a lot about like, how much do you know and how much have you actually been willing to give me? It better be everything or else I'm going to be really disappointed. But that's really interesting to hear from you guys both, for sure.
Yeah, I totally see that showing up too. And I'm like glancing at your chart while you're talking, and I'm like, okay, need motivation, fear transference, undefined ajna, that like there's more layers to where the projections come from. But I think the stories I shared about Instagram stuff are totally like projections about my foundation or perceived lack of a foundation from people who don't know me.
Yeah, which is so funny because if there's anyone who's going to have the foundation and care about it, it's a one line, right?
Ariana, I really related to something you said earlier about people projecting intentions onto you. And the first thing that made me think of is I have innocence, motivation, and desire transference. And so people project desire onto me a lot. Like I'm just like innocently moving about the world, you know, accidentally leaving things in my wake a lot with this impacting closed aura, but from a place of innocence. And then when people feel that confrontation, the stories that they project onto it often are like, you had the intention of harm in this situation, or you had the, even if not harm, even if it's not necessarily a villainized intention, just like assuming that there was some motivation behind a sentence I said or an action I took. And when it gets reflected back to me that way, I'm shocked by it, because it's no, I was just innocently, obliviously, perhaps without enough attention to my impact, moving through the world.
Yeah, I was literally just saying this. Yeah, and it's so funny because I mean, the way I describe, which is like obvious, it's a simplification, but the way that I would describe innocence motivation is like really not that much motivation at all. It's like just doing it because it came to me, man. So that's hilarious and just such a great example of how ridiculous these can get. But something that I'd also love to talk about, and maybe you'd have to tell me, but working together, this has come up for you and become more obvious, but how has understanding fifth lines overall and the way you move through the world as a fifth line affected the way you interact with and I would say appreciate and understand other fifth lines? Because for me, it's actually really had me start to question my own expectations of other people. And a lot of your posts, I have to say, really inspired me with that too, because a lot of the stuff that you said about like what happens to us, I'm like, do I do that to other people? Like, I probably do.
When you were talking about your brother and you were like, he's not a bad person, but, and then gave an example of projection, I saw the image of the Everybody Poops kids book, you know, but it was everybody projects. And we tend to, we find ourselves reminding the heretics we work with that we do this too. But you know what? They know as well, because they already know. Like, so many of the first questions that we got when we started Heretic Haven and like opened the space up for what do you guys want to talk about? What are you thinking about? Were about people's own sense of responsibility over their own projections. So I think there's just something to like, we don't have the, like, projection affects everybody. Everybody's projected onto, everybody projects. I have this sense that like fifth lines, or at least like aware fifth lines, we just don't have the luxury of being ignorant to it. Like, we have to learn how to navigate the projection field. So yeah, just pointing out, like, I think fifth lines and maybe six lines to some extent as well, because they're both these like kind of vantage points that are watching things from up here. We are aware. Like, I think we've learned so much about projection, even if we're not using that language, even if we don't know human design, that we tend to be more careful, because we see on some level, however conscious it is or not, we see the tendencies of projection and relational dynamics and out in the matrix. I didn't directly answer your question, so let me pause and see if Allyson has a direct answer, and then we can come back to me.
Yeah, what's coming up for me is kind of at the beginning of Heretic Haven, and then more recently as well, we've had conversations about what does feel nourishing, what types of relationships do allow us to feel safer or more resourced in relationship with other people, because fifth lines, conscious fifth lines in particular, can be really paranoid about connection, getting too close, what's going to happen, when is the other shoe going to drop? And more recently, we had a conversation about, we ask people to share, like, what's a relationship that does feel nourishing for you, and what about it does feel nourishing in particular. And so I think if we can pull from what feels good to us and offer that to other people, if we're not already doing so, that can be really supportive. So like moving through relationships with curiosity, and without assumption, being able to ask questions. And something that came up for us a lot recently was the ability to speak to projection and just like have an open, honest conversation about it and say like, hey, I noticed this is coming up for me. Can we talk about it? Where it's not necessarily like mitigating the projection field, but it's allowing us to look at like, wait, what is this little facet of this disco ball showing right now? And what am I missing? What am I not seeing because my attention is so focused on this one area of this person? But yeah, I think just like offering a lot of grace and asking questions and being really like connected to what's coming up for us personally, which allows us to be vulnerable with a heretic and about what's coming up for us. And we can share it and have a more honest and open relationship because of that. And I think like Kelsey and I, when we first met, was actually in person, which I think is really rare for people in like the human design and astrology Instagram worlds. But we first met in person, and our kind of like friendship and relationship grew really slowly and like kind of innocently and maybe a little bit like awkwardly at first, where we were like sharing like tiny tidbits back and forth, while constantly talking about how paranoid we felt with every layer of closeness we were gaining. So yeah, I just think like for me as a fifth line, that level of openness and honesty and authenticity feels so good. And so giving myself permission to like be that honest, even when it feels cringy or awkward, even, for me feels nourishing and supportive.
I love that. I love focusing on the one facet of the disco ball that you're seeing right now, basically just sharing like, hey, this is what I'm sensing. Like this may be a projection or it may not be, but this is just my perspective and my viewpoint on what's going on.
I'm thinking about like how projection is not just this negative thing, right? It can also be, it's just a quality of reality. It's just a thing that happens. And you ever notice how like types tend to talk to other people, how they want to be spoken to? Like projectors offer a lot of recognition and invitation. And I inform my generator partner all the time. And maybe that is slightly less useful than yes or no questions, but I inform him because I appreciate receiving neutral information so much. And so I think what you're saying, Ariana, about like there can be this ability to see through the haze a little bit more, fifth line to fifth line, and what Allyson's saying of like, what do we appreciate? Some of the things Allyson and I have honed in on and communicated within Heretic Haven is curiosity, humility, in other people. And like that's because that's how we want to be treated, as Allyson said. We appreciate when people are a little bit more keen on like, I'm like making a squinty face as I say it, because it's like trying to focus through the projection a little bit, you know, like trying to hone in on something concrete amidst the haze. We see how valuable that is to receive as these projection magnets. And so we naturally will offer it sometimes. Many of us will naturally offer it to others as well.
I love that. And actually, as you're saying that, I'm like, that is so true for me. Like, I feel it's funny to me when I'll like show someone, like, I really know you, right? Like, here's this piece of you I really see. And then they just like completely ignore it. And it doesn't necessarily hurt my feelings, but I'm like, damn, that would have changed my life. Like, that would have really made my day that you actually see me for me, right? But yeah, I love that. That's so funny. And that also, I don't usually think of it that way, but as a generator, I do ask other people questions all the time. And it's funny because I actually read from a manifestor once. She was like, don't you hate when people ask you to respond? You spent your entire life with people wanting you to respond and you hate it. And I was like, that's a good point. I shouldn't do that to my manifestor friends.
And
but,
I never came full circle with this thought that I tried to start at, which is that this is projection too, right? Like because we appreciate humility and curiosity as fifth lines, we project that other people appreciate that too. Because I appreciate neutral information as a manifestor, this manifestor you're talking about, because I appreciate not being put in response, I assume that other people appreciate that too. And that's a projection as well, because we can all only see reality through this one unique lens that we've been offered, for better and for worse.
Yeah. I love this whole idea of it being neutral too. It reminds me a lot of conditioning where we, it's talked about in such a negative manner and everything. But I mean, again, both of you have a great depth in source human design. And I mean, Ra was like, listen, this is just energy, right? The problem is when we identify with it. And it's not us. Same with projections, happens all the time. But speaking about how projections can be neutral and thus can be helpful, what have been some advantages for you? Like we can lighten this up a little bit. What have been some of the positive aspects of being a five line and, projections that have been put on you in the past or now currently? You have both muted yourself, so it's up to you guys to decide who goes first.
I mean, for me, it's hard for me to like specify what about being the fifth line do I love, because it's just like it's me. I can't imagine it any other way. I'm a teacher. I love helping shit land for people, and that happens a lot. That lights me up. I'm excited by that, and that is always what's happening, at least if it's a correct interaction. It's never what's happening for people close to me, but it's always what's happening with the strangers and the people at an arm's length. And I enjoy that. That's very fun for me, but I enjoy it, and it's fun for me because it's my design. I had another thought, but I lost it. So Allyson, you take a try and I'll let you know if it comes back.
Yeah, I can't think of specific instances where I feel like the projection field or projections have felt super beneficial to me, aside from just I have a lot of fourth line friends. Ariana, you might as well have a lot of 2/4s in your life just because of the harmonic relationship to the 5/1. And I think sometimes like I see the way they look at me when I'm talking to strangers, and this just total like, how are you doing that? And why? And the ease I feel in anonymity in a group setting, the ease I feel like meeting strangers, it completely melts away when I'm in a place where like people expect that they already know me. I'm like uncomfortable and I'm paranoid and whatever. But yeah, I mean, put me in an airport, I'm like, I'll talk to anyone. So I think that aspect of being a 5/1, the left angle cross with the fifth line, I think that's kind of fun. I remember studying abroad and just like making friends with people at bars in Spain that I like never talked to again. And it's like, that's so fun. I remember that being really fun. So yeah, I think that's one thing that's coming up is like the way that fourth lines see that and are like, how and why and what is that?
Never heard of her, don't know her, don't know that energy. What's so funny and comes to mind is actually I was in Key West with another 5/1 a few years ago, and there was this younger guy that was hanging out with us that we just met there. And it was like later at night, we were just hanging out on this pier or this dock, and he's like, this is just so wild. This is just so wild that we're hanging out with each other and like having drinks. And he was like making out with the other one, the one that I was with. And he was like, and I'm like, never gonna see you guys again. Like, that's so weird. And I'm like, you're saying that like it's a problem. This is every day for me. Like, I don't mind. I don't care that I'll never see this person again. Like, it was a karmic meeting. It's all right. I truly could not comprehend like why he had such a problem with that. I was just like, this is one moment in our lives, right? That's blasting us off into another one. And I think I looked at his design and he was like a 4/6. So I was like, that makes a lot of sense. To you, every interaction needs to matter and be like so full of depth. For me, it's really just not. So I can totally relate to that. And actually, it's not 2/4s that I have a lot of in my life. It's 4/6s for the most part. Everyone in my family besides me, my close family, is a 4/6. I'm the 1/5/1. But yeah, so that's really funny. But I was going to move on to the next question, but Kelsey, did you?
Yeah, well, I just was noticing, listening to Allyson answer this question, that this question is actually really perfectly timed for where we are in the Heretic Haven journey in the fifth line experience, because we structured it inspired by the 3 awareness centers. So we focused on like first and second principle and splenic awareness in month 1, and now in month 3, then ajna in month 2. Now in month 3, we're kind of addressing things through solar plexus awareness and that process of spirit consciousness and 5th and 6th principle. And a lot of what we're talking about this month is kind of transcending the reality of the pain of the fifth line experience that we focused on a lot in the first 2 months. And how, it's not a linear process. You don't just like get done one day feeling sad about the projections and about being misunderstood. Like you said, the falling from grace is inevitable, right? Like the projections are inevitable. But as you move through the process and you're honest with yourself about your grief and your pain and what kind of inner shame it brings up for you to be projected onto, and you look at your own design for evidence of where your own mind gets stuck in that process rather than allows it to just be what it is and surrender to it and be a passenger, right? You can reach a point that you reach over and over again, right? It's not linear, but you can reach a point, and there are breakthrough moments where you start to calibrate to this as more of your default experience than the grief and the pain. You can reach a point where you're surrendered to it and you're like, all right, this is my role. This is what I'm here to do. And I think part of what's been so cool about Heretic Haven for Allyson and I is we approached it from start to where we've almost seen it through at this point. I don't even know if we did it intentionally, but we did it in such a fifth line way where we like created this account that wasn't us, right? Like Ariana, you were talking about how you knew Allyson and you didn't even know she was associated with it, yet she came up with it. And, like we were behind this anonymity, behind this meme account, creating something that we were really inspired about, that's really valuable, that's really powerful, really heretical. And it had for a long time nothing to do with our faces or names or our personal businesses. And then we slowly started to like peel back the layers and tell people who we were. But yeah, it's just like, it was so different from ways that I've promoted things before. And it was really fun and it felt really safe. And so I feel like I'm at a point right now, and it sounds like from some of the stuff you've shared, Ariana, that you're at a similar point to Allyson and I, where there's a period of like real heaviness around it, real grief around it, lots of anger, lots of bitterness, lots of frustration around it. Finally being willing to acknowledge the ways that we have been victims, and finally being willing to actually be like, to place some blame on people who have victimized us and dehumanized us, which I think because of our perfectionist tendencies as fifth lines, and because we desire always to come to a universalization, we're so aware of projection that we'll like deny our personal experience because we're trying to get to the universality, and because we know the inevitability of projection, that we're like, I'm just projecting, but like, yeah, you are, but that's okay. Like, this is your story, this is your experience, it needs to be validated. So anyways, once you move through all of that, a lot of times once you validate yourself, once you let yourself feel all the shit you feel, then there's these moments, these tastes, as I've been saying, of like really accepting it and transcending the grief of it, and being willing to play this role, being willing to be the character. Oh, interesting. That's who I am to you. Oh, and that was something that even a year and a half, 2 years ago, I would have been like, that's not my responsibility to play that character for you. But now I'm like, oh, it is though. Like it is my, like, that's what I'm here to do. So I'm enjoying getting to have some fun with that now, after a long period of like being pretty pissed off that was the cross I had to bear.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So much goodness in all of that you guys have said. But one thing I really pulled from it that I really resonated with is like, and I think we can apply this to all of our human design charts really, is knowing that this is the way I'm supposed to be. So it's not like it's a bad thing or my fault, even if the result of that isn't always a super pleasant thing, when I could see that. So for example, when someone gets really mad at me for not fulfilling an expectation, I can be like, oh, this is kind of like the way it's supposed to be. Like I can release some of that heaviness, but still have that responsibility, like Kelsey was saying, of playing that role of being the heretic, but knowing that like, since I'm meant to be the heretic, since I'm meant to sometimes be burnt at the stake, like it doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong. This is just how it works, right? It's like a 3-line knowing, oh, I'm kind of meant to fuck up sometimes. And like maybe have that be more obvious than other people. Knowing that means I'm doing fine, and it's okay, and it can be more fun. So that's something I pulled from it and really, really love. And we had a couple of questions left, but honestly, the biggest one that I want to ask is, what is some advice that you have for someone who is a 5-line, who, is afraid to be seen because of that constant field of projections they live in? And honestly, I think that we kind of have one answer from you guys is like, if you want to start off with maybe a little more anonymity to get stuff out there, that might be a great way to get your foot in the door. But is there something maybe that you would like tell yourself in the past about this, you know, if you were like afraid to like get something out there?
I don't know if this is helpful, but I'm still afraid to get something out there. So I think that maybe that's part of it, maybe for a 5-1 in particular. I don't know if we get to a place where it stops feeling a little bit activating to be a projection magnet, is a term Kelsey used before. I don't know if it stops being activating to feel that way. I think that finding what resources us, again, like if it's certain types of relationships or certain people, finding what resources us in whatever way, if that's like somatically, if it's like magic. Kelsey and I have both done mirror spells before, like whatever it is that feels like a resource in a territory that can be a little bit unsettling. I feel like that can be helpful. But yeah, I don't know if like maybe the fellow 5-1s maybe would like to hear that it's okay to feel a little bit insecure about it. Like it's okay to feel like it's not perfect what you're putting out into the world, because to a certain extent we're designed to feel that way. And there is the possibility of moving forward in spite of all of that. Like, where is the forward momentum or motion or baby step in spite of the fact that it's a little bit scary, in spite of the fact that we've been burned before, in spite of the fact that there are people with insecurities who are committed to being a victim, and they're going to make us a villain because someone's got to be a villain if they have to be a victim, you know? So knowing that it might feel a little bit activating anyway, but finding where those edges are for where we are in the present moment. Where is like the edge of this for me? Is it like posting on Instagram? Is it having a separate Instagram account? Is it having a newsletter instead of an Instagram account? Is it creating a haven for heretics, which feels somewhat protected from the rest of the world for this season of life? But yeah, it's like validating where we are in the present moment without attaching to it, fully validating where we are without attaching to the fact that it's always going to be hard and I can never be seen because I'm going to get punished, not going all the way to there. Yeah, I'm curious what's coming up for you, Kelsey.
Also, that's wildly helpful, by the way, knowing that like it's always going to feel a little bit that way. If I look at it that way, truly, which is what I think I'm learning to do. I'm like, all right, user 6874XY3 is always going to tell me, you know, I'm causing a problem by saying this. So knowing that, might as well put a little bit something forth, right? But yeah.
All of that, and I'm like kind of giggling a little bit inside at how my answer is going to be the 5-2 version of that. Like, the heresy that I want to bring in this moment, like the bottom line is that no one outside of you can ever offer you the grace that you're seeking as well as you can for yourself. No one outside of you can validate your experience and your worth despite it all, despite the projection, your truth, despite all the misunderstandings. No one ever will. Like, period. It doesn't mean that we can't have beautiful, rich, intimate moments where we feel seen and we feel connected. But our baseline for experiencing that is that we believe our own experience and we believe in our own worth. And we can validate our own experience and worth, and we can resource, it's a word Allyson kept bringing up, like resource your sense of validity and security within. So like another thing we're talking about a lot in the third month of Heretic Haven is like really honing in on people's distinct not self mind, you know, through making sure they're aware of the mechanisms of not self in their undefined centers, introducing them to the not self hierarchy, even bringing in a little bit of like distracted view and transferred motivation, because ultimately it's our own responsibility to accept this role, you know, to accept this design, to accept this trip, as Ra would say. Like, this is our trip. We're here to have this one. And as much as we like to get the message across, and as much as we're designed to get the message across, our message is not about us, you know, and maybe that's a little left angle cross coded. Like our message is different from our essence, and the message that we're here to get across is that's for others, but we're here for our own experience too, whether we're right angle or left angle. We're also here for our own experience, and we don't need, or at least we won't ever feel truly safe and worthy if we require someone outside of us to validate and see us exactly as we think we need to be seen. So that's part of why I love human design so much, is because it shows me my own tendencies to self-sabotage. It shows me my own attachments and my own fixations, and it puts the power back in my own awareness, so that, you know, if the fall from grace is inevitable, then maybe I can redefine grace. If insecurity is inevitable, then maybe I can redefine security.
I love that. Awesome. Okay. Well, with all that being said, and it was a lot, they dropped a lot of wisdom on us. What kind of help and support can people get from Heretic Haven? And what kind of people would love to be inside of there? Because I feel like it's probably most five lines.
This conversation has been like a little mini Heretic Haven moment, because how can you get a group of fifth lines together and not experience like tingly truth bombs?
I know.
You know, and there's a lot of different like pieces to Heretic Haven, and one of them is the monthly kind of transmissions from Allyson and I, but there's also two times each month where we come together as a group, and it's just like wild to watch. Like, it's just, there's so much genius and wisdom inside of this group. And I feel that way on our call too. You were dropping bombs too, Ariana.
Oh, thanks. Call me a fighter jet.
It's what we do. It's what we do.
I don't think that's what fighter jets actually do. I think that's exactly the opposite of what they do. But thank you so much.
Can I just real quick, Allyson, do you want to share anything specific about the support Heretic Haven brings? Because once again, I did not really answer the question. I just talked about how cool it is to be with other fifth lines.
Yeah,
Like, and we're done.
Well, we need that sometimes. I appreciate your sacral saying we're done, because Allyson and I often meet for 2.5 hours. So thank you. But also, Allyson, please, if you have something else to share.
Yeah, I think like Kelsey said, this podcast has included some of what we talk about in Heretic Haven. Kelsey spoke a little bit to the structure, but we sort of spend month one talking a little bit about resourcing and security. What does safety look like for fifth lines? What helps bring that forth? And really like laying a foundation for like, what exactly does the fifth line experience mean? How does it differ for left and right angles? And yeah, that month one is really like first line stuff that we kind of like lay the foundation. And month two, we spend honestly a lot of time talking about what hurts in terms of the fifth line experience. Month two is about the Ajna binary, or the third and fourth principle. If you could think about third line stuff, the mistakes we make and the lessons we learn from it, and also fourth line stuff and how painful relationships can be for fifth lines. And we really set out to make a lot of space for grieving those experiences and like alchemizing what happens when we allow that pain to really exist and we fully validate it and we stay with ourselves through that experience. And what in month three then is kind of like what's on the other side of that. When we zoom out and we think about pain as just one of many facets of the fifth line experience, what else is possible? What does it mean to step into responsibility as a fifth line? And what does like true embodiment look like for the fifth line? What are some role models we could even look to as heretics? We mentioned Lady Gaga earlier, too. So yeah, it's a really cool dynamic. Like, I don't think Kelsey and I have ever done anything like it before. It's a really dynamic experience where we have transmissions and there's some space for integration, and then we meet as a whole group, and then we do breakout groups as well, so people can connect in smaller groups based on their aura type or their specific profile. And we have a private Instagram kind of in the background throughout all of this, where we continue to share things and where people can share their stories anonymously if they don't want to like broadcast them on Zoom. So Yeah, it's a really wonderful experience. We are kind of ending the first round, and we have plans to do a second Haven experience in the fall, which we're really looking forward to. So we have a wait list running now if anyone's interested. But it's been amazing. Like Heretic Haven, I'm talking about it like I'm, selling it, but truly it's been such an honor to be with other fifth lines and to hear what is universal about our experience.
I love that. First of all, I love the structure of that. That is so cool and so in depth. Very one line. But also I love that you guys have like a fifth line post secret on the Instagram. Do you guys remember those books, or it was like a website where you could like send in postcards and it would say like ridiculous things? One of them was like, I survived 9/11 and my family doesn't know. And now I like live a different life or something like crazy shit like that. But I love that. And hey, man, Heretic Haven kind of sells itself. So, anyway, this has been really, really incredible. Thank you to you both for joining me.
Thanks so much for having us. I'm excited to find out more about you now beyond my initial projection of the idea of who Ariana is. I'm happy to know you and dig in more.
You too. Goes to you both. And Allyson, lovely as always to have you around in my aura.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, you guys rock. Everyone listening, you rock. And I will talk to you next time.